Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Alexa, and today I am going to be talking about the 11 books that I read in the month of February. I have been having a lot of fun making pie charts lately, so I'm going to throw up my February reading wrap-up pie chart. We're gonna go over this really quickly. In the month of February, I read 1 fantasy book, 5 romance books, 2 fiction books, and 3 young adult books. So starting out with the first book that I read in February, it was Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. So this book came out on January 21st, I believe. It's a thick one. It took me about 5 days or so to get through. So I can't say too much about this book because it is the 3rd book in an adult fantasy series, but it basically just picks up where we left off from the 2nd book, and we are following Violet. She is at Bezgayath War College, and there's just a lot of chaos going on, and she is doing anything she can to survive and protect those that she loves. I think as far as this series goes, my favorite book is definitely Fourth Wing. This would be my 2nd favorite, and then Iron Flame is definitely my least favorite at the moment. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about it, and I gave this book 3 stars. The next book that I read is If Only I Had Told Her by Laura Nowlin. So this is the book that comes after If He Had Been With Me. This is one of the books that I did some DIY stenciled edges on, so if you want to see the video where I do this, I will link it in the description for you. This book is such a precious continuation of the first book. I really loved the first book whenever I read it, and I genuinely have not stopped thinking about that book. It has been almost 2 years since I read that, and I will still find myself randomly thinking about it. So just getting to consume another piece of that story was really special. Like I said, I had a really fun time reading this book, and I gave it 3.5 stars. The next book that I read is The Great Alone by Kristin, and I have been wanting to get to this book for a minute, so I'm very glad that I got the chance to read this. This book is essentially following our main character Lenny and her family as they move to Alaska. Her family wants a fresh start and hope for their future, so they head to Alaska in hopes of just that. But once they get there, they realize that Alaska is not the relaxing, picturesque landscape that they expected it to be. As the winter months approach and the darkness lasts longer, Lenny and her family also face darkness of their own. And like many of Kristin Hannah's books, this book starts out in 1974 and it goes on up until the early 2000s, I believe. So you are following Lenny throughout many years of her life. This is a really good book. I mean, to be expected with Kristin Hannah books. It is heartbreaking, it is infuriating, and it's just a really special book in my opinion. I will say that personally, I didn't really like the ending. I really wish that this book had either been 50 pages shorter or 150 pages longer. That is the only thing that I didn't like about this book, and it's still definitely worth the read because I know a lot of people do like the ending in this book. I just didn't. That's just my opinion. But I gave this book 4.5 stars. The next book that I read, I borrowed from my boyfriend, and it was The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I feel like everybody's heard of The Hobbit. It's the prequel to Lord of the Rings. And in this book, we are basically just following our main character, Bilbo. He is a hobbit. He is a cozy homebody to his core, but he ends up getting dragged along on an unexpected adventure. And so you are just following the story of that adventure. This is such a precious little cozy fantasy book. I mean, it is as popular as it is for a reason. The reason being that it is a spectacular book. And yeah, I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I read is This Is a Love Story by Jessica Soffer. This was Jenna's book club pick for February. It is essentially a love story that is spanning 50 plus years being told in a retrospective format. Like, I guess they're basically just like looking back on their love story and everything that they've been through. And it takes place in New York City. Now, do not be deceived by my well-spoken and chipper description of this book because this book was atrocious. I think the actual love story itself had a hint of potential, but the way that the characters are depicted in this story makes them incredibly unlikable. And on top of that, I was just not able to mesh with the writing style of this book. It changes up a little bit towards the end of the book, but for the most part, this book is written with very short sentences and the whole thing reads incredibly choppy. An example of a paragraph would be something along the lines of, You remember her walking through Central Park. You remember laying your eyes on her for the first time. You remember her tearing off a piece of her sandwich and feeding it to the birds. You remember her tucking a piece of hair behind her ear. You remember the color of her lipstick matching that of a ruby. I could sit here and be a little bit more of a hater, but at the end of the day, this book wasn't for me, and that's totally okay. And we're gonna leave it there. I gave this book 2 stars. Next, I know some people out there are gonna be so proud of me. I finally read Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. And a little bit later in the month, I read Wildfire as well, so I'm just gonna talk about them together. So this is a 3-book series called Maple Hills. Icebreaker is the first book, Wildfire is the second book. In the first book, we're following Anastasia and Nate. Anastasia is trying to get herself a spot on the Olympic skating team, and Nate is the captain of his hockey team. But one of the ice rinks that they practice on gets sabotaged, and so they have to share a rink. That is my summary of the description that is on the back of this book, but to be completely honest, there is a lot more that happens in this book. It's not just like them on the ice skating rink fighting and then kissing. They are college students, and so there is a huge cast of people who are in their friend group who also appear not only in this book, but in the rest of the books as well. I'll get to this one in a second, but as for this book, I mean, my favorite part of it is pretty much just the whole world that has been built and the whole friend group that is within that world. A lot of them have very interesting connections, strange priorities, and witty banter. This book was definitely interesting enough to hold my attention. I liked some of it, and I definitely could have done without some of it. So I gave it 3.5 stars. And in Wildfire, we are following Aurora and Russ, who are in the first book. Now, this book is about them. They initially met during a one-night encounter, and they thought they would never see each other again. But now they both have summer jobs as camp counselors at the same camp. And the camp has a strict no dating rule, so they are basically just trying to navigate that and get through the summer. I thought this book was okay. I enjoyed it enough to finish it, obviously. But I thought that their conflict was very annoying. The ending was a little bit unsatisfying in my opinion, and pretty much the last 50% of this book was more on the boring side. So yeah, I definitely liked Icebreaker better, but this one wasn't bad. I rated it 3 stars. The next book that I read is Happiness for Beginners by Katherine Center. This book like hurts my eyes to look at. It's like so bright. But this book is following our main character, Helen, and she is going through a divorce. And she signs up for a wilderness survival backpacking trip. She's very excited for some time to think, have some mental solitude, and just get a grasp on everything going on in her life. But that all gets derailed when she finds out that her brother's best friend, Jake, is also on this trip. I think this section on the back of the book perfectly describes my thoughts and feelings on this book. It says, Happiness for Beginners is Katherine Center at her most heartwarming, captivating best. A nourishing, page-turning, up-all-night read about how to get back up. It's a story that looks at how our struggles lead us to our strengths, how love is always worth it, and how the more good things we look for, the more we find. I absolutely loved this book. The only thing I didn't really like were the initial interactions between Helen and Jake in the beginning of the book. Something about them just felt a tad unrealistic to me, but as the book went on, that became overshadowed by my love for the rest of this book. I also remember at one point this month, something happened to me that reminded me of something that happened in this book. And I was like, oh, that's so similar to what happened to Helen and Jake. And then I was like, wait, who are Helen and Jake? And then I was like, oh yeah, they're fictional characters. I gave this book 4.5 stars. The next book I read is Love on the Brain by Hazelwood. Every single time I read the title of this book, I think about the freaking Rihanna song called Love on the Brain, and then it's stuck in my head for the rest of the day. So I'm excited to put this book back on my shelf and stop thinking about that song. It's not that I don't like it, I'm just tired of it being stuck in my head. This book is so fun. We are following our main character, B, and she just got a job working for NASA, but unfortunately she is going to have to work with one of her enemies who is named Levi. So as her and Levi are working on this project for NASA, B finds herself in a lot of sucky situations. Her equipment goes missing, people are rude to her at the office, and Levi starts to go from being an enemy to being something a little bit sweeter than an enemy. Like I said, this book is so fun, a classic Hazelwood STEM romance. I feel like I know exactly what to expect when it comes to these these books, but I was a bit more pleasantly surprised with this one than I have been with her other books. And for that reason, it is now in my top 3 Ali Hazelwood books. I gave this one 4 stars. The next book that I read is A Whole New World by Liz Braswell. This is a series that Disney did called Twisted Tales, and it's basically alternate endings to popular Disney movies. So this one, for example, says, what if Aladdin had never found the lamp? So you're kind of following the Aladdin story as we know it, and then things take a complete 180 and you're following along with the characters that you know and love, but it's a completely different storyline. I absolutely love this concept. I read a lot of choose your own adventure books as a kid and was so obsessed with them. I read every single ending to every single book. And when I read books, I often think to myself, what if there was some kind of alternate ending to this story? And this book series is basically exactly that. All of that to say that I had a great time reading this book. They have like 20 plus other books in this series as well, so I will definitely be reading more of these because, like I said, I am obsessed with this concept. I gave this one 3.5 stars. And the final book I'm going to talk about today is Magnolia Parks, The Long Way Home by Jessa Hastings. This is the 3rd book in the Magnolia Parks series. I have also been annotating this series, which has been so fun for me. Like I said, it's the 3rd book in a series, so there's not too much that I can say about it without spoiling everything. I feel like a small fraction of my heart is dedicated to holding quotes from this book series. We're just following a bunch of rich London socialites slash gang lords. They're insanely dramatic and pretentious and toxic, but it is the most entertaining thing to read about, and surprisingly, one of the most gut-wrenching stories I've read to date. That's all I'm gonna say. It's 5 stars for me. I'm about to say something that I never thought I would say, and that something is that I finished the TBR that I picked for February. And I also read multiple other books that were not on said TBR, but I just had to do a little humble brag because I have never done that before. Not that it really matters at all, but there is something super satisfying about reading all of the books you said you were gonna read in a month. Anyways, that is all for today's video. If you guys liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below letting me know anything you want to let me know. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram and make sure that you are subscribed so that you can see more videos from me in the future. But for now, that is all, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye! I just set off the Siri on my iPad after saying series. I did it again. I gave this book... So, of course a plane would fly over right when I said it perfectly. I either have a really good balance or a really flat head.